Chapter 4. To say the hall descended into pandemonium was an understatement. The whole of Hufflepuff table was shouting and exclaiming in surprise. The only ones who seemed to be louder were the Gryffindors, who seemed shocked that they didn't gotten Harry Potter. Which confused Harry to no little extent. Yeah, his parents had been Gryffindors while in school, but he wasn't them and he hadn't been raised by them. A few loud bangs later the din quieted and a rather frazzled deputy headmistress shakily snapped out the next name. She finished allowing the headmaster to speak a few words before a magical feast appeared before everyone. While there were foods of every sort, Harry dished out some of the plainer items. He liked rich food in small amounts, and limited them to when they were desserts. Spotting one of the other first-year girls eating a platter of rolls, he asked her if she wanted some and gained a feverish nod. Reaching around Neville, he picked them up and handed it to her. He sat there eating quietly before mentioning his puzzlement over the general insanity that happened after his sorting. That was peculiar. I'm not sure if I'm flattered or scared over the fact I'm in such high demand, Harry commented, earning a laugh from a few people nearby. Another boy, who had been sorted earlier, Justin something, gazed up at Harry in shock and surprise. "Why'd they get so loud over you?" he asked, and Harry shrugged. "I don't really understand it either, but apparently I'm famous in the wizarding world. Not that I knew about this since I was raised by moles." A look of confusion crossed the other boy's face and Harry had to continue. "Are you a first-generation wizard in your family?" There was a nod. "Apparently I defeated my parents' murderer as a baby. He was some evil political terrorist. Quite disconcerting, to be honest," Harry said. "Oh, and it's Harry, by the way. Nice to meet you." He offered a hand. The boy shook it. "Justin Finch Fletchley, and yes, my parents are not magical. I don't know if there's anyone else in my family that's magical." It was rather a shock. "I'm sorry about your parents." Harry smiled and nodded. "I guess I can understand, though it's probably weird on your end as well," Justin said before changing the topic. "I was talking to Ernie here and he was telling me about Quidditch and the flying on broomstick deal. Personally, I'd prefer a rugby team. The idea of falling from 5 stories doesn't seem all that appealing." There were several confused looks at the word rugby from people sitting around them, but Harry smiled in agreement, even if he had never actually played or seen a game, mind you. "Yeah," Neville said, "I've never been on a broom, even though my background is magical. My grandmother always thought it was too dangerous. But you might be good at it, Justin. You too, Harry. You've got a good build for a beater or keeper," the first-year boy Justin had gestured to said critically. "I'm Ernie Macmillan, by the way," he pointed to a boy at the end of the table who looked a bit snobbish. "That's Zachary Smith." "Hello," Harry said. "This is Neville Longbottom, and I don't know if you know the girls, but that's Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones." The girls glanced over mid-conversation and smiled. "You should try out for a position next year, Potter," Ernie said earnestly. "You'd probably do well after some training." "I don't know if that'd be fair," Harry said, considering it slowly. "Oh, why?" Justin asked. "I'm part giant," Harry said. "I'm probably going to get bigger and stronger in the next few years, making me a better player. But it wouldn't be a fair advantage for the other players. Plus I don't think I'd enjoy being on a broom. They seem a little fragile for someone my size and weight." "I guess you're right. You probably wouldn't be allowed anyway," Ernie said, resigned. "Part giant?" Justin asked curiously. "It means he's a vicious brute," Zachary's eyes sneered from his spot. Harry frowned. "I'm not. And it's rather rude of you butt into a conversation you've no part in. Especially after blowing off an introduction," he told, getting an audible sniff and sneer in return from the boy. "Forgive me if I don't bow and scrape, Mr. Celebrity. But I won't deign to talk to lowly half-breeds like you," the boy said meanly. "It's bad enough with the groundskeeper, but now you—" "Watch your mouth," An older boy seated a few spots down said sharply, his grey eyes glaring. Puffs are friendly folk. We're a house based on loyalty and hard work. We're a house that achieves by doing their best and helping others, not by considering others beneath them. Hear, hear. Another person piped in. A few mutters of agreement came from the people nearby. Zacharias merely humphed and turned away with a glare. I don't understand, Justin said, glancing around. Harry smiled a bit sadly. It's all right, I didn't know until recently either. Apparently there's a humanoid magical being known as giants that are able to crossbreed with humans. My mother was a half-giantess and passed down the physical heredity traits to me. Justin stared at him goggle-eyed. Giants are real? Like the giants in Jack and the Beanstalk? Justin asked. Not exactly, they're a rather rough bunch. While it's possible to communicate with them, they don't exactly like anyone. It's rather difficult to have a relationship between wizards and them. Usually any child between a giant and a human is left with the human parent unless the father is dead, then they're abandoned. My mother was adopted into a mole family after her dad died when she was a baby. However, her giant characteristics manifested differently. While I'm tall and it's difficult to injure me, she was of normal height but had a true redhead's temper and a taste for the giant's natural food. Like deer and rabbit. Harry said honestly. She had a rather strong tie to earth-related magics. She could charm a lot of inanimate objects with ease. Are such things common? A girl asked who was in their year. Not really, I think I'm the third student ever to attend that was part giant. Harry said honestly. I'm not sure if any other sentient crossbreeds attend or have attended here. Here's hoping you get expelled like the first one, Zacharias muttered. The older boy who interrupted the first time narrowed his eyes at him and Zacharias abruptly shut up. The boy watched him for a few more moments before turning to Harry and offering a hand. Hello, Cedric Diggory. Harry smiled and shook it. Nice to meet you. Not to be rude or anything, but what year are you? Harry asked curiously. Third, he replied with a crinkling of grey eyes. I still can't get over how tall you are. We usually say each year's first years seem to get smaller and smaller. But this is the first time they got bigger. Another boy chimed in, earning a table-wide chuckle. Just our good luck, Harry deadpanned. It's always left to the younger generation to surpass their predecessor after all. Oi! I resemble that remark. An older boy further up the table yelled back and the whole table laughed. Then you're good to go, Hannah called. Harry smiled. They all seemed like a bright warm bunch. The rest of the feast went quite well and Harry actually felt even more pleased to be in Hufflepuff when he learned their head of house was in charge of herbology, though he wouldn't have minded having Professor Snape. As the feast came to a close, the headmaster stood once more. He gave a long list of warnings before ending with one that made Harry's eyes widen in disbelief. There's a whole floor closed off for something unbelievably dangerous? He hissed in anger as they finished eating. Those seated around him startled. Harry had been quietly pleasant the whole night. Even with Smith's unpleasant jibes he'd been nothing but smiles and an equally soft voice. If anything, the tall boy looked downright stern and displeased. A few of the students were so startled that they stopped their agitated, concerned whispering to stare at him in shock. Sounds dodgy, Neville said worriedly, fiddling nervously with his roll, tearing it to shreds. Sounds like an invitation for someone to do something incredibly stupid while calling it a dare or bravery, Harry snapped, throwing his hands up dramatically. A few of the older students who had paled at the mention of dying now had a look of deep thought and even agreement. Why do you think that, Harry? Susan asked curiously. Because it is like an open invite or target sign for those who deliberately try to seek out trouble. Bloody hell, if you have something dangerous in a school full of children, you don't bloody well inform them that it can kill them. They're right apt to think you're exaggerating or become curious. I mean, Can't you imagine some group of idiots going exploring up there because of a dare or they want to test a hypothesis? Harry pointed out angrily. Several heads nodded. Sounds like something a Gryffindor or Ravenclaw would get into, Cedric muttered. They were dismissed and several prefects got up directing them towards the doors and to their commons. I mean, and forgive my language for earlier and now, bloody buggering hell. If there was a dangerous area and it was only for a short period of time, I'd say it was under maintenance or construction. Better yet, remove the bloody danger. Is this not a school filled with children? Harry argued as they stood up to follow the prefects. Yeah, Susan said, nodding firmly. I don't get why anything like that would be mentioned. I understand the forest since it has a number of dangerous creatures and you could get lost, but any idiot can get onto that floor. It is in the school. Do you think your aunt could help Sue? Hannah asked curiously. If it's a danger to multiple students and could kill them, I think the DMLE should look into it. The DMLE? Harry asked curiously as they headed towards stairs leading down towards the basement of the castle. Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Neville said. Susan's aunt is in charge of it, Hannah supplied. I think you should write to her. I mean, you could inform her of the warning. I'm sure other students will be writing home about it. It would allow for her to set up precautionary measures in case anything happens later on. She might even come to the school to investigate or question the teachers about it. I mean, they have to know what it is. I suspect even the headmaster couldn't get away with closing off an entire floor without their agreement or foreknowledge. Harry said. The other three nodded while the older student watched on in mild shock. Blimey, Harry, you sure you shouldn't be in Ravenclaw or Slytherin? Cedric said, dazed from behind them. That's an amazing amount of reasoning and cunning right there. The Hat said I could go into any four, but they decided Hufflepuff would suit me best. I'm fairly glad. It would have been a bit sad not to be with Susan, Hannah, and Neville, especially after how well we got on when we're riding the train. Harry replied honestly, an earnest expression on his face as he looked down at the shorter boy. Cedric looked a bit stunned before grinning widely. Well, I'm sure it'll come in handy for anything and everything, the older boy said cheerfully, giving his arm a friendly slug. Harry grinned mischievously before ruffling the other boy's hair. Oi! Cedric said, swatting a turning and amused glance from all those who caught the action. Finally they stopped in front of a series of barrels. The prefects turned and smiled at them warmly. Hello the little badgers, the boy prefect said with a smile. I'm Gabriel Truman, a fifth-year prefect. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our esteemed house. Indeed, the girl prefect said equally warmly. The house of our reputable founder, Helga Hufflepuff, as you have heard from the dear old Sorting Hat, holds great esteem for hard work, patience, dedication, loyalty and truth. We are a house that does not hold with liars, cheaters or laziness. I am Elena Reynolds, another house prefect. There are a few other of us, 4 in fact, so if you ever need a hand just come up and ask. Now entering the dorm is quite simple. You simply tap your wand on this barrel. Truman pointed to the second barrel from the left-hand corner, in rhythm to singing Helga Hufflepuff. He gave it 2 long taps and then 3 quick ones. The large barrel front swung open. If you get it wrong though, or if someone else does, they'll get drenched in vinegar. There's also mild charms that prevent non-Hufflepuffs from finding the dorm and common room. So if you're meeting up with someone, it may be better to have them wait for you in a public area. The older boy said, leading them in. Harry ducked the doorframe much to his friend's amusement. He went down the short tunnel at a slight hunch and let out a deep sigh of relief when he could properly straighten in the common room. Although they were underground, the ceiling themselves were about 15 feet high, plenty of room hopefully even when he got older and taller. Glancing around the common room, Harry couldn't help but smile. The room was a wide, roughly circular shaped and filled with an overwhelming sense of comfort, gentility, and warmth. Low-seated couches in a velvet black satin intermixed with dark yellow and golden tan armchairs. The wooden tables and built-in were an interesting mix of warm light-colored woods. Dangling from the ceiling and creeping out from window ledges were a mix-match of plants and green. Pillows and throws were tossed haphazardly everywhere, finishing the cozy look. The prefects motioned the students in further, seating the first years in the very front before grouping the older students behind them and finally standing to the side of another doorway. In plodded a grey-haired, softly rounded, incredibly motherly-looking witch. Clothed in what looked like sensible, brown robes and a neat but obviously often used witch's cap, she stopped in front of them with a pleasant and warm smile. "Good evening, my little puffs," she said in a bright voice. "And welcome to a new year in Hufflepuff, here at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. To all of you returning, I'm glad you're here, safe and sound as well as healthy and bright. I trust you've done your homework?" A few students groaned while others nodded or shouted agreement. "Good," she said with a smile. "For those of you who are unfamiliar with me, I am Pomona Sprout, Professor of Herbology here at Hogwarts, and head of Hufflepuff. I'm overjoyed to have you all here in the Den of the Badgers. Before I send you off to unpack a little and get to know each other even better, I have a few rules and reminders. There is no fighting here or anywhere in these dorms, common rooms, or school. If you are caught by another teacher, it will be passed on. An additional punishment will be added on top of what you already received. There will be no bullying, belittling, or crass behavior either. I will not abide such actions from you. If you are caught doing it or suspected, the issue will be handled with the utmost immediacy. Furthermore, I will do weekly dorm checks. You are expected to keep everything neat and tidy. You are not allowed to call house elves, but if you know the spells, then you, of course, may use them. There will be no potion practice in dorm rooms or commons. Any animals or familiars you have, you solely are responsible for. I will not be handling another kitten dispute, so I trust you will keep the males and females separated and handled." A few rueful chuckles echoed through the crowd, and two third-year girls flushed bright red and nodded furiously. Smiling, she clapped her hands. "Good. Then I bid you a good night. Prefects, I'd like you to ensure our little ones get their map along with their time schedule tomorrow. I trust our 7th years know the drill." A boy and a girl both nodded seriously. "Good. I bid you once more a good night. Sleep well, dear kits." A chorus of uncoordinated good nights echoed out of the commons as she turned and disappeared once more. Harry gently shook Neville, who had dozed off a bit, against his shoulder. The other boy jerked a bit and rubbed his face sleepily before glancing at Harry with mortification, earning a chuckle when he turned bright pink. He scrambled to his feet, Harry following moments after. The girls' dorm leads through the right doorway. An older prefect who hadn't been introduced yet stated, "There are wards to keep out any boy and an alarm that will go off if any boy tries to breach it. To try and do so will earn you a nasty shock, detention, and loss of points." To the left are the boy dorms with similar restrictions. However, there is a chime charm that lets you notify the dormitory room of the boy or girl you wish to speak to if you need to get someone's attention. They are not to be used after 10 for those under 2nd year and are not to go off after 11 for those in 3rd through 4th. For 7th through 5th it is 12. There is a curfew and you must be in a dorm by the assigned time. For those in 2nd or lower it is 9:30. 3rd and 4th are not expected back till 10, and for those in 5th through 7th have to be back at 10:15 the latest. If you are missing during the check, you will lose points regardless unless you are in the infirmary or in detention. Clubs or being in the library do not excuse you unless given express permission by a teacher and our head of house, who will inform us prior to such actions, so don't try to pull a fast one. The groups nodded. They milled around, each briefly separating into boys and girls, friends of the opposite sex bidding each other good night and see you tomorrows. Finally the boys trooped into the comfortably lit hallway following the oldest boy prefect. The first years are here on the first left-hand sided. All odd years continue from there with the 7th at the direct end. Even-year dorm rooms are on the right. If you get confused, just check the trunks. In a couple of days you will be able to do different things to make the room homier, and if you need any assistance let us know. Each room has a bathroom fitted with enough shower stalls, sinks, and toilets as you and your roommates need. Breakfast is at 7 to 10, and for those of you who have first block, class begins promptly at 9:30. Do not wait for the food to vanish to go to class. You'll more than often end up late if you do so. During the first week prefects will be coming by to get you all up by 8 in case you are not up on your own. If you miss class by falling asleep after we've woken you up, we will not be pleased. The 7th-year prefect boy said firmly, earning eager nods from the first years and somewhat abashed ones from the older. A few, after all, had a hard time with adjusting to the new sleep schedule. Dismissed, he said curtly, turning to head towards his room. Harry and the other first-year Hufflepuff boys entered their new dorm room. There were 7 of them in all: Zachariah Smith, Ernie Macmillan, Justin Finch Fletchley, Wayne Hopkins, Oliver Rivers, Neville Longbottom, and Harry Potter. Stepping into the room, Harry smiled at the surprisingly large bed at the far-hand side next to the bathroom. The room was long and surprisingly wide, but it was likely that the room had some sort of enlarging charm. Next to the bed was a combination wardrobe desk bookcase. At the end of it his trunk, and his cage was hanging from a ceiling hook. The other boys had similar setups, and Harry was overjoyed to learn that Neville had the bed next to him. Flopping down on the thickly quilted yellow and black coverlet, Harry savored the softness. His bed was a 4-poster built high enough off the ground that it didn't make sitting on it, or rising from it, difficult or uncomfortable. Beds, he learned, were often low and made his knees hurt from the squatting it took to get in one or out of it. This one, however, wasn't, and looked much larger than the other boys by a few feet. Harry loved it. The firm mattress, the comfy bedding and thick yellow hangings were tied back with black braided ribbon. It was far better than the small one back at the Dursleys. Maybe now that he had money and magic he could buy some items that fit in his room or even move out. 2 new unknown boys approached Harry, curiosity evident on their expression. One had bright blue eyes and an equally bright smile, with a floppy mess of dirty blonde hair, greeted him hand outstretched. Oliver Rivers, Snight to Metcha. Harry shook it firmly and warmly. Harry Potter, it's nice to meet you as well, he responded. The other boy, who had a surprisingly large amount of freckles for being so tan, stuck out a hand as well. His dark brown eyes were practically black and his hair was equally dark, and cropped close to his head, although there were obvious curls. Wayne Hopkins, he said, voice soft. Once again, Harry Potter, Harry said with humor, shaking the boy's hand, earning a shy smile. Neville finally freed himself from whatever broom conversation Justin and Ernie had started up and plopped down on his bed after the 2 boys had greeted him and moved back to their own. Neville apparently was between Harry and Wayne, while Zacharias had the bed closest to the hallway door, followed by Ernie, Justin, and Oliver. Neville glanced over his shoulder and wondered for a moment if he should feel bad for those 4 boys, and which of course to feel worse for, before turning back to Harry. So, Harry started, which classes do you think we'll have tomorrow? Dunno, but it'd be brilliant to have herbology. It's the one class I'm sure I'll do well in, Neville replied. It would be a rather nice way to start the day. Early morning so the day hasn't gotten too hot, and dew still on the plants, Harry said a bit wistfully. Yeah, Neville said. Wonder what different plants the greenhouses have, and I wonder if we'll be crossbreeding anything? Do you think we'll be doing a lot of it with magic? I mean, wouldn't it affect how the plant grows, like acidity? Harry asked, and they chatted for another 30 minutes before they got tired and finally got ready for bed and went to sleep. Harry was the first person up the next morning. Glancing at the wind-up clock seated on the desk, he saw the time he expected, 6:45 on the dot. He glanced at Neville's hangings through a crack in his and saw that the other boy was still dead asleep. Slipping his feet into his slippers and grabbing his wand, he pushed back his drapes and got up. After brushing his teeth, taking a shower, he wandered out to find the first boys stirring. He was mostly dressed except for his tie, which he was fighting with. Giving up on it momentarily, he left it around his neck while slipping on his socks and shoes. "You up, Neville?" he whispered. The other boy was sitting up groggily. "What time is it?" Neville grumbled, scrubbing at his face. Harry glanced at the clock and answered. "It's 7:20. Glancing at a mirror, he fought with the tie some more and tried to smooth his hair. "Blast," he muttered to himself. Neville got up with a quiet snicker. Harry glared at him half-heartedly. "It never lies flat," he complained, and Neville merely grinned. "Give me a bit. I'll be ready in a minute or two," Neville said. "Take your time, we'll go down when you're ready." "Do you think Susan and Hannah will want to eat with us?" Harry asked as he made his bed. Neville merely shrugged before going into the bathroom. 20 minutes later, both Harry and Neville were leaving the dorm room, glaring at the ties in their hand with a mixture of anger, frustration and misery. They entered the common room where one of the older prefect girls greeted them with a frown. "You can't tie them? Why didn't you help him?" she asked Harry sharply. "It's your job as an upperclassman." "I'm a first year," Harry answered, unhappily fidgeting in front of her. "I'm Harry Potter, and I've never worn one before." Neville quietly glared at her from below his bangs. The girl flinched before flushing with embarrassment. "My apologies, I'm not familiar with all the first years and I had other matters on my mind," she said, stretching up to help him. I'm freakishly tall." Hagrid and Professor Snape said it's 'cause I'm part giant on my mum's side. Harry said, bright red with a combination of embarrassment, shame and awkwardness. "How do you tie them anyway?" she quietly explained while helping tie Neville's, then retreated to the other side of the room, mentally berating herself while helping another young girl with her hair. Harry and Neville glanced around the room. "I don't see Hannah or Susan," Neville said quietly. "Do you think they went ahead?" "Dunno, but it's nearly 8. Do you want to go up and meet them later? We can save them seats or see them in class," Harry suggested. Neville nodded and they followed a few boisterous older years to the Great Hall, seating them in a spot near the end with room for the two girls if they showed up. They stared at the abundance of food. "Blimey, there's so much," Neville muttered. "Yeah, I think I'm going to stick to fruit, toast and milk today though. I don't want to eat so much after last night. I'm still a little sick from all that treacle tart, though it's my favorite," Harry answered, a bit green. He wasn't used to eating so much, though he would enjoy it and would maybe fill out a bit while at school. Neville agreed and had porridge, bacon and a hot cup of tea. The two girls showed up towards the end of their meal and plopped down bright-faced. "Good morning," Susan said with a smile, plopping down next to Harry. Hannah slumped down next to Neville. The two boys blinked at Hannah in surprise, who was currently muttering something about pillows, and glanced at Susan in question. "Oh, don't mind her, she won't be awake till she gets some food in her. Had to practically drag her out by her hair this morning." A grumble from Hannah implied agreement, annoyance, and gratitude all at once, making the two boys crack up. Harry pushed a cup of juice into her hand while Neville handed her a muffin. She sat up and drank a little before taking a large bite. Susan asked for the milk on the other side of Harry, who handed it over with a smile. Soon, with Hannah finally recovering and her usual bright self, they received their schedules and left the table. Since it was Monday, they headed up to History of Magic. Settling in a seat on the left side of the classroom, Neville pulled out an herbology text while Harry pulled out a small hunk of wood and his whittling knife. Smiling to himself, he focused on the image in his mind and started smoothing out the already roughed-out shape. Neville glanced over, watching the soft, almost delicate motions, and marveled over how dexterous Harry's long tapered fingers were. "What are you making?" he asked curiously. The piece of wood was light in coloring and appeared to be pine. "A bird," Harry said, "a swallow to be specific." Pine's excellent for plain carvings you plan on painting later. I've already have the general shape. He ran his finger along the top of it, defining where the head joined the body. Here's the back of the bird, and here's where the wings are folded against its body. I'll shape it and give it some basic texture before painting on the colors and further details. I'll flatten the bottom to let it sit flat. Neville smiled and nodded. Harry's fingers smoothed over the grain once more before going back to getting the general shape of the wing and tail. The door opened and a bushy-haired girl from the other day walked past to take a seat in the very front. Neville noticed her glance and frown. She stopped beside Neville and Harry's table in the aisle and blurted out, "Is that allowed?" Harry ignored her. "Excuse me?" She tried again. Hannah and Susan glanced over and Neville glanced at the girl in a rather wary fashion. "Are you allowed to have a knife in school?" "I doubt it. I don't think you should be doing your hobby while in class as well. You should be reading ahead and writing notes. You don't want to lose house points. I suggest you put that away or send it home. It has no business in a classroom." Harry glanced up at her finally. "And who exactly are you?" he asked. The girl seemed startled. Hannah and Susan frowned at her. "I'm Hermione Granger," the girl answered, a touch uncertain and certainly snootily. "All right then, I thank you for your concern, but I feel I should remind you that it's none of your business. I wasn't disrupting class, since it doesn't start for another 10 minutes or so, and if it is against the rules I'm sure a prefect, teacher or either the deputy headmistress and headmaster will inform me. I hope you have a nice day though, thanks." He turned back away from her. Neville followed his lead and went back to his book. The girl looked affronted and opened her mouth, but Susan and Hannah glared and shook their head. "Really now?" she huffed. "I think you show," but Hannah cut her off. "Bugger off," Hannah said shortly. "You aren't in our house and you've no right dictating to us and acting like you're in charge. Like Harry said, a prefect or a teacher will tell us if we're doing something wrong. It's not your job to be looking after us and getting into our business. Or are you trying to hold up the rest of the class?" She looked pointedly to a few students who were stuck behind her. She flushed and went to the front, taking a seat. Harry glanced up at Hannah and offered her a slight bemused smile. "Didn't get enough tea in you, I see," he said, and Susan giggled when Hannah stuck her tongue out at him. "See if I save you next time," Hannah said in a mock-affronted tone. Harry snorted and gathered up his wood peeling and placing them in a bag before returning his carving items to his bag. It had a specialized pocket for it with an expansion charm. The whole bag was quite useful like that, and he pulled out his writing materials and books from another enchanted pocket. It was a minute or two before class would start when the last of the students arrived. A trio of Gryffindor boys stomped in, yelling and joking loudly. Harry, amazingly so, hadn't noticed their entrance or their sudden entrance and was chatting with Neville about planting while doodling on a piece of parchment to practice holding and writing with a quill. "I wonder what dragon manure would do to non-magical plants," he was saying when someone yelled, "Oi! You're Harry Potter." Harry glanced up uncertainly and annoyed. "Yeah? What's it to you?" Neville glanced over and so did the girls. The other Hufflepuff who'd taken seats around the four looked at the trio in annoyance as well. The Gryffindor girls suddenly craned their heads around to stare at him, giggling even louder. Harry scowled. "Blimey. Can I see the scar?" a redhead said, reaching out to shove at Harry's hair. Harry grabbed the boy's wrist and said, "No. What business is it of yours?" Harry then turned away. The Hufflepuffs turned away as well. "Hey. Do you like Quidditch?" the boy asked, taking a seat across the aisle next to Neville. "Probably not," Harry said, shooting Ernie an apologetic look and earning a shrug in return. The rest of the class ignored him as a ghost suddenly floated in and started droning on about the first-year syllabi. "What about chess?" The other two Gryffindor boys seemed to have some more decorum and nudged him, trying to shut him up. The ghost just kept talking. Harry ignored him, firmly reading from his textbook, writing his notes out and highlighting different parts and names. Other students were shooting the boy dirty looks. He finally stopped after 10 minutes and about 3 minutes later was asleep with his head on the table. Harry finished his chapter about 10 minutes after that and shut the book and opened another. He glanced at Neville, who looked back at Harry, who wiggled his book. Smiling, Neville pulled out his own book and they both read for the rest of the class. Leaving in a rather sleepy, disgruntled mass of first-year puffs, Justin groused, "That class was the most boring thing I'd ever had to suffer through. Professor Binns put everybody asleep except that crazy girl in the front. And that's only because she kept raising her hand and waving it around like a mad woman. The man's a ghost. I highly doubt he cares or notices." "Do you think it'll get better?" Susan said with a yawn. Whether she was talking about the class or the fellow student wasn't specified, but in this case maybe that was a good thing. Hannah leaned against her, still dozing. "Probably not," Harry sighed, deciding on going with class, though he doubted Granger would be much better, while straightening out poor Oliver, who nearly fell forward, still partially asleep from his impromptu nap. "I think I overheard the older years talking about how that the class is self-taught. The older years usually make an outline or buy a study packet from some Ravenclaw and use that for the whole term. Maybe one of the upper years has last year's or knows someone we can get it from." "That would be helpful," Neville said quietly. "We can ask them at lunch," Wayne said with a smile. "But for now let's go show them why Hufflepuffs are the best at herbology." "Joy," Zachary's eyes said grumpily. He was still unhappy with sharing a room with Potter, but he liked the other boys well enough. Glancing at the other boy sneakily, he had to admit the half-breed wasn't that bad. He was actually pretty nice, and couldn't be worse than that red-headed buffoon who had kept prattling on to the guy during the first 15 minutes of class. They arrived on time to the greenhouses and milled round the tables, shyly greeting the Slytherins they were paired with, who sneered in response, though a few were mildly more friendly. "Hello class," Professor Sprout said, coming in. "I'm Professor Sprout and I'm looking forward to teaching you for the next 5 to 7 years. Today we'll be reviewing." Harry's morning finished with an introduction to fang geraniums and a deep affection for his thick leather gloves. He didn't know that that afternoon would be an introduction to his greatest enemy.
Hey guys, what's going on? Thank you so much for watching today's episode. If you guys want to watch more like it, please subscribe to my channel and become part of the video game fanfiction plot. And please leave a comment down below and hit that like button. If you guys have any suggestions on any stories you guys want me to read, don't hesitate. They're always welcome here in the video game fanfic plot. That also goes for video games. Until next time, goodbye!